Efforts to contain the coronavirus are in full swing, but the economic toll may have much further-reaching implications, with many businesses yet to kick into full gear and consumers more inclined to stay home. Some say global growth could suffer. Others are confident the Chinese economy will ride out the storm with little long-term impact. So what factors are at play, given the sheer size and significance of China in the world economy? What can be done to prevent a potential slowdown? I'm joined in the studio by Mr. Adam Dunnett, Secretary General of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China. From Shanghai, Jimmy Zhu, Chief Strategist at Fullerton Research. And from Sao Paulo, Brazil, by Dr. Jose Ricardo, CEO of the international branch of LIDE China, a platform promoting integration between Chinese and Brazilian companies. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us at this very special period of time. I want to go to Adam here in the Beijing studio. First of all, thank you very much for showing up and not wearing a mask at this very special moment. Now, we know China's GDP accounts for around 16% of the global total and contributes to over 30% of the growth of the world economy, not to mention the role China plays in global supply chain, tourism, and etc. So what happens with China's economy inevitably impacts the global economy. How do you look at this potential domino effect? What makes you optimistic and what concerns you the most? Or maybe you're not so optimistic.
First of all, China's Herculean efforts to address this global crisis has been phenomenal, and I think everybody supports what China is doing, and few countries could actually do what China is doing in that regard. So from a health perspective, China is doing a lot right now. Also, if you look back historically at other viruses, Ebola, MERS, SARS, for example, the world has come back. Everybody's bounced back, and the effect has not been as great as often people thought in the moment itself. In terms of optimism, that's what I see. In terms of concerns that I have is how do we move forward from now? February 10th was the date where businesses were supposed to go back to work, and a lot of them have not gone back. Central government has given them the okay, but local authorities have made it difficult for them. We have a lot of companies in industrial parks that want to get back to manufacturing and producing their goods, but they're being requested to provide all sorts of statements and documents that has created a lot of confusion right now.
You mean documents concerning clearance on the medical side of things, like whether everybody's quarantined or clear to go? Is that the kind of formalities? Basically,
they've put the responsibility, moving it from central government to local government to now to the companies themselves. And basically, companies are having to sign off on statements saying that they take legal responsibility for any abnormal circumstances that could have an impact locally. So companies are surprised to come back from the holidays, and normally they would abide by the regulations that would normally have, but these additional ones have them scratching their heads saying, what else am I going to be liable for if something goes wrong? So that's something that really does need to be addressed urgently.
Is there anybody talking to the authorities about this problem? I mean, are they hearing the complaints, let's say?
Yes, they are. I mean, companies have been asked to put forward certain statements and emergency plans to assure local industrial parks and local authorities that they have measures in place to deal with this if an emergency happens. And of course, that's what we want. But these measures and plans that companies have submitted have been rejected in many cases. So the companies have said, well, what do you want? So in certain cases, the government has come back, or the local parks have come back and said, well, actually, what we want is something more like this. So they've been given this direction, so now they have a template of what they need to sign and to get their business going again. But it's awkward. It's an awkward feeling. And so people have to adjust to this, and some companies have, and others are waiting to see and get legal advice as well.
Jimmy, what is your take of the difficulties or challenges faced both on the side of the government, because they have a very big task to fulfill the goals, you know, the development goals, the indices that they have to fulfill at the end of the year, but on the other hand, businesses might also encounter some difficulties as what Adam has indicated.
I believe the authorities now are taking a balanced move, with, which means on the period of a lockup, but it's also, of course, allows some business to carry on. Because now the China, the growth, it could be severely hit in the first quarter at least. So I think two things the government are taking care of. Number one is the employment, and number two is the debts. Because if it's totally not allowed the business to operate in the near term, probably these two areas will pose the challenge to the midterm or to the long term. But for now, I think from the capital market perspective, what we look at the stocks market, what we look at even the bond market, it seems like people believe that this economic impact could be stay for short term. So let's see whether the thing can be slowly solved, maybe by the end of the month or end of next month first.
Jose Ricardo, what is your forecast of the situation? You have been living in China you lived in China for a couple of years, and you visit China very frequently, and you do business between the two sides. What is your observation and forecast for the near future?
Well, the Brazilian exporters, they're already suffering a little bit, especially because according to the Brazilian economy, in 2019, iron ore, petrol, and soybean were responsible for 78% of the total export from Brazil to China. And the prices of these three commodities already dropped up to 15%. So the Brazilian exporters are quite anxious and expecting that the Chinese government can gain forces and stop this coronavirus. At the same time, a lot of Brazilians may suffer in relation to the import of Chinese goods. We are just following the trade between Brazil and China, but the exports from China to Brazil may have some delay. Supply chain has not suffered yet, but it might be also a big risk. But in a whole, Brazilians are very confident that the Chinese government, in efforts with the Chinese people, can fight and win this war against the coronavirus.
All right. Let's talk about China-EU trade as well, because the European Union is China's biggest trading partner, and for the year 2018 and also for the first bigger part of 2019, trade with the EU grew significantly by over 10%, I understand. So, Adam, what is the forecast on that front? Now that many companies have suspended flights with China, I do not know about the freight transport part. Update us on that aspect.
Yeah, well, it's true. The airlines, and that includes cargo as well, from the European side, many of them have cancelled their operations with China in the short term because of this situation. But I was speaking with one of the airlines today, and they think one of the most important things is for us to address this issue, but also to maintain a sense of a sentiment of optimism. But we're going to bounce back from this, and when we do, we need to be ready. And so, very important is how we move forward in the steps ahead. One of the most important things, since you bring up EU-China trade, is also the investment side of the equation. And of course, this is the year where both China and the EU have committed to try and come up with an investment agreement. And
is that being affected?
Well, it could be. Negotiations are happening on a nearly monthly basis, and visits have been postponed and cancelled because of it. Obviously, we're in the 21st century here, so technology could play a role. Video conferencing could facilitate those talks to make sure that they continue on track.
What about the great majority? How many European businesses are still holding out or are back to work despite the difficulties that they have? Because I understand some businesses were operating, the staff or even donated money to help people fight the coronavirus. What is your survey? Do you have a picture of the overall situation?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Most of them have gone back to work this week where they're allowed. There were certain areas where they weren't allowed to go back to work. In most cases, now they are. Again, there are certain regulations that have encouraged, basically, some recommendations that encourage the reduction of the flow of people, managing it in a way where we reduce the risk of transmission. And so many companies have adopted work from home type arrangements. Many companies are working in different shifts. They've changed the hours so you're not as exposed to high peak hours for traffic. They've arranged for vehicles to take people so they can avoid public transportation.
Yeah. Let me go to Jimmy in Shanghai. How do you foresee the international trade between China and other countries being affected in the second half, in the first half of this year maybe, and the longer term trend, because the Chinese government has said the fundamentals are still solid? What is your take on the situation?
I think one of the key things is it really depends on how the situation is going to be eased. I think based on our own scenario is probably we expect that thing could be start to ease by end of March. The business can start to operate, and probably we will see probably the exports, the imports will start to back to normal. But according to the current BDI index, the index gauging the shipping activities, it drops to a multi-year low. So probably it signals that lots of business now is the trades start to stop for the moment. But on the longer term scenario, we think it will affect some midterm growth, because the reason is some seasonal products probably are just gone. They probably will not come back. But for some other products, especially those manufacturing products, probably we will see a V-shaped recovery in second quarter if the virus can be well contained. So I think whether the virus can be contained, the business can back to operation, I think by end of the March is pretty important.
Yeah. Finally, let me go to Jose Ricardo as well. Going down not just the trade, but also investment, I understand, as China is diverting huge resources to fight this epidemic. How do you foresee the foreign direct investment, Chinese direct investment in Brazil being affected in the near term?
Well, according to the Brazilian Minister of Economy, from 2013 until 2018, from 5 years, the foreign direct investment from China was of $70 billion. But due to this coronavirus outbreak, there will be for sure a reduction in the Chinese investment in Brazil. Once more, the Brazilian government and the Brazilian entrepreneurs, they're analyzing how is the trend. They're offering several bids in relation especially to infrastructure and technology for the Chinese companies invest in Brazil, but now it's unknown how the Chinese investment will react in Brazil due to this virus outbreak. We are just analyzing day by day.
Yeah, well, to better contain the virus is the best dose of certainty that China can inject to every people's mind. I just want to ask Adam, maybe one short last question. In 2003, during the SARS virus, it is estimated that the global economic cost was $40 billion. Is there any wild guess you want to take for the possible loss of this one? Very difficult one, I know.
Well,
the bit of it.
Since then, China's economy has doubled and doubled again. It's 4 times the size as it was then. Back then, they said that the cost was about 0.83% of the economy. They're looking at similar figures for this one now. So what was the figure you gave? 40 billion was estimated to the global economy. Then I would go with 160 billion.
160 billion. Well, let's
Final
see.
answer.
Let's see whether this damage will be so big or could even be bigger. But anyway, let's fight the virus first. Many thanks to all my guests for coming to the show. I want to thank Adam Dunnett, Secretary General of the EU Chamber of Commerce, Jimmy Zhu, Chief Strategist at Fullerton Research, and Dr. Jose Ricardo, CEO of the international branch of LIDE China. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.